Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar on teen mental health, hosted by Iota Lambda Omega Chapter's Empower Our Families Committee. I am Melody Johnson Morales, First Vice President and Program Chairman, and I am joined by the committee co-chairman, Malika Curry and Mia Winkley. We proudly serve under the leadership of our president, Dr. Angela L. Williams, and we are thrilled to see so many of you here tonight. I will now turn it over to you, Madam President.
Good evening, and welcome to this parent webinar on teen mental health. Nationwide in May, Mental Health Awareness Month is observed to bring attention to the importance of mental well-being. We are delighted and thank you for prioritizing the mental health of young people by joining us this evening for this essential discussion. Iota Lambda Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, along with the Kappa Phi Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, are hosting this event to raise awareness and reduce stigma associated with teen mental health. Considering the increasing incidence of mental health challenges among young people, we want to empower caregivers and community members with knowledge and tools to support the emotional health of adolescents. Together, let's explore valuable insights and strategies to encourage our teens and create a supportive environment where they can thrive emotionally and mentally. Again, we hope this webinar will help us collectively increase dialogue about mental health with the young people in our lives. With that said, I will now turn us over to our moderator, Mr. Anthony Bond, who is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and a Howard County high school educator. Mr. Bond.
Good evening, everyone. We want to thank you all for coming out tonight and for participating in this webinar. You know, mental health is something that is of dire need in the public school system because many of our students are suffering from different levels of mental health. And what we want to do today is talk about ways that the parents can help with helping their students. So tonight we have a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Rosalind Sheppard, and she is a school psychologist and a licensed psychologist. She has worked with students in 3 different Maryland public school districts. She is currently working in high school in Howard County Public Schools. Dr. Sheppard is an owner and the lead psychologist at the Essential Outcomes, a private practice in Crofton, Maryland. She has worked in the field of psychology for over 25 years, and her areas of expertise include depression and other mood disorders, anxiety, autism spectrum disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, executive functioning weaknesses, and behavioral disorders. We would now like to present our speaker for tonight, Dr. Rosalind Sheppard.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm so pleased and honored to be here to present to you this evening. So we're going to dive right in and talk about mental health. So if we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to sort of give you a brief outline of what we're going to be covering today. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about some facts about the teen brain and mental health. We're going to also talk about some risk factors, and we'll also be talking about protective factors, and I'll tell you what that means. Then we're going to move into what are some look-fors, things to look for, and then how to talk to your teens about mental health. And then finally, we'll also kind of talk about some resources. So I thought it would be good to start off with some facts about the teen brain. So teens, their brain really does not fully develop until their mid-20s. So when they're calm, they have the ability to problem solve almost as well as adults. But it's important to remember that red portion of the model of the brain, that's called the prefrontal cortex. And that part of a teen's brain, as we mentioned, is not fully developed. So that part of your brain has to do with problem solving and thinking things through and kind of just, not being impulsive. So as you listen to some of this, you might think about a teen that you know and love and know that some of those skills are not fully developed at that age. But around the time of the mid-20s, that's when that's fully developed. But again, there are a lot of other factors that can kind of contribute to issues with a teen's growing brain, such as drugs, alcohol, and stress. So we want to be mindful of that as we're thinking about our teen. So on the next slide, we get into the second fact, which is with teens, different parts of their brains grow at different rates. So during this period of development, as we talked about their brain growing and developing, there is a lot happening. There are a lot of connections being made, and a lot of things involving feelings are impacted with brain development. And as their teens are learning and growing, that is a sign of brain growth as well. So the third fact to kind of think about with teen brains is that teen brains are very flexible. That's why they kind of search for new meaning and new experiences, because these experiences help their brain to develop and grow and make new connections and the different ways of connecting and thinking and being creative. And that's why this time in their lives is when they're starting to grow in their development of opinions about things. It might be a little different than what you think. But this is this time in their lives where it's an opportunity for them to kind of grow and gain knowledge in different areas. So you'll see them kind of growing a little bit more in how they interact and how they think and how they choose to be as people. And the next fact is about dopamine. I don't know if you've heard about this chemical in our brains, but in the teen brain, dopamine is highly active. And this is the chemical that has to do with the reward system in our brain. So that is why teens will take more risks and they'll do things to test limits, because this is a time in their lives where their brain is kind of working full throttle in this area. And the reward centers of the brain are very active. And that's, again, leading to this tendency to look for new and exciting experiences. And then when we get to the fifth fact, learning, as we all know, doesn't just happen in school. Teens are learning a lot and they need opportunities to learn. So they're taking in information, things that might last a lifetime. They're absorbing things, and brain growth is sort of shaped by the lessons that they learn. And so it could be from people in their community, could be role models. And that's why mentors are really important in a teen's life, because a mentor can be an adult that can kind of feed into them during this period of rapid brain growth. So we're going to move on to the next slide, and we're going to start getting into teens and mental health. So let's go to the next slide, and we're going to share some information about some basic information. We're going to have just some basic definitions. So when we talk about mental health, it includes emotional, psychological, and social well-being, because we know all of these things connect, because there are connections between what we think, what we feel, and how we act. So our mental health really helps determine how we're going to handle things, how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and the choices that we make. So we know that mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood, adolescence, and through adulthood. But as we mentioned earlier with our teens, because it could be such a turbulent time for them because of all of these things happening with their growth and development, we know that it's really crucial to make sure that we have some stability in this area of mental health. So let's move to the next slide. So when we talk about incidents these numbers are really rising, but if you look at the current stats, it's about 1 in every 5 youth that are aged 13 to 18, either currently or at some point in their life have had a seriously debilitating mental illness. Now, those numbers are staggering and they're growing. And we know that there are several factors that have contributed to that. And we came out of a pandemic, and there's been a lot happening just in our society and in our world. So it's really important for us to think about those numbers and think about how common it is, because more than likely it will touch the life of a teen that you might know. So this slide I like because it kind of talks about different disorders. And if you can see the areas that are highlighted, it says, based on age, the incidence that we see. And if you notice, the teen years, of course, are higher in most of the areas. With behavioral disorders, the ages of 6 to 11, that kind of outshines some of our teenagers. But when we look at the depression and anxiety statistics, you can see that there is a huge jump there. And as a clinician myself and a school psychologist, I can tell you in the schools, anxiety is a huge issue that we're seeing with a lot of students in high schools. So if we move on to the next slide. I like this one because it gets into college students. Oh, uh-oh. We want to go back. Go back one more. Yeah, there we go. There. Yeah, so it talks about college students because this kind of taps into some of our teens. So if you think about a college freshman or even a sophomore in some regards, there are a lot of raising incidents of symptoms of depression and anxiety in our collegians. Suicidal ideation, that has climbed to the highest rate in about 15 years when they did a survey of college students. And there are a lot of students that were assessed with this survey through the National Institute of Mental Health, and they found that, again, these have been some really disturbing trends in the incidents that have raised among our college students. So if we go to the next slide, we want to talk a little bit about suicide rates among teens, because we know there's a link between mental health and incidents of suicide, either completed suicide, suicidal ideation. The national trends, if you look at that, males ages 10 to 24 tend to die by suicide 3.4 times more than females. And in ages 10, yes, I said 10 because we're seeing more and more incidents of younger children that have had increasing rates of suicide. It's doubled since 2006, making this the second leading cause of death for that age group. And there are attempts across the nation. There's a stat here of over 3,000 attempts by young people in grades 9 through 12. So this is a disturbing national trend. And then also in Maryland, we added some information. So this is going back a few years, but in 2019, 18% of students in high school seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year based on some data from surveys that were done. And then 16% reported making a plan. So again, suicidal ideation, suicide rates have raised tremendously. And as I said, there is a link between mental health needs and suicide. So let's talk a little bit about risk factors. So I'll give you a quick definition before we move to the next slide. And a risk factor is basically anything that can be a contributor to mental health needs. So let's move on to the next slide. And there is something called, we call them ACEs, or they're called adverse childhood experiences. So this is a #1 risk factor for mental health issues. And what these ACEs are basically trauma or history of abuse or witnessing violence or any of these things that would contribute to an experience that would be traumatic for a child. So as you can imagine, if a child has these experiences, there's a high risk factor for later or current mental health concerns. Another risk factor is things like medical conditions. So if there are any traumatic brain injury or any huge or medical issues, that definitely is a risk factor for mental health concerns. Again, there's the risk based on biological factors or chemical imbalances in the brain. And then, of course, use of drugs and alcohol, and a lot of times a factor of having feelings of loneliness or isolation is something that's also a risk factor. So this question comes up a lot because people will ask, can we change mental health? Can that change? Can we find success? Can we get treatment? And yes, it is important to remember, understand that you can change your mental health over time. And there are definitely a lot of factors that can contribute to the success in this area. But when the demands, so if you're stressed beyond what you have as resources and coping ability, your mental health can be impacted. So for example, if you have a teenager and they're working long hours or struggling with self-esteem or peer pressure and feeling stress, they can have an impact. That can have an impact on their mental health. So let's talk about protective factors. So I have a definition here, and the umbrella is kind of a visual for that. So the risk factors are the things we talked about earlier, all those things that can contribute to mental health issues. And protective factors are like the umbrella. So they'll protect you from the rain or the elements. So those are things that will help have a lower likelihood of problems. And they also help impact or reduce the negative impact of risk factors. It's like an umbrella protecting you from a storm. So that's what we think about with protective factors. So let's get into what they could be. So if you notice here, there's an individual at the bottom, and then there's circles around that person, and each layer indicates different levels of common protective factors. So if you think about the individual in the innermost part of the circle, those would be characteristics of that person. So perseverance, so healthy self-esteem, so your ability to notice your strengths and be able to recognize when you've persevered through challenges. All of those are examples of individual protective factors that can help a person to make it through challenges with mental health. And then the next level, if you see, well, let's go back to that slide again. So the next level is family and friends. So if you think about that, it's just what it says. So the people that are around you, your parents, family members, friends, mentors could fit into this area as well. And then the furthermost area is school and community. So this could be teachers, it could be peers in the classroom, community, if students are involved in activities, coaches, sponsors, things in the community. So all of these things serve to protect our young people from issues that might get them in a place of not having healthy mental health. So we'll move on to the next one. So we're going to talk a little bit about warning signs. So warning signs is just as it sounds. It's things that are look-fors, things that we need to look for with our teens, because a lot of parents will say to me, Dr. Sheppard, how do I know the difference between my child being a teenager and some issues with serious mental health concerns? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk to you about some general warning signs, and then we'll talk about sort of how you can apply that to your own child. So let's go on to the next slide. So this information was based on research done by the National Institute of Mental Health. And it kind of talks about common warning signs, especially within our teenagers. So the first one is if they lose interest in activities they used to enjoy. So let's say your teen was involved in sports, athletics, and clubs, and they were doing all of these things. And then all of a sudden, you notice they're not doing that as much anymore. And they're kind of shying away from things that they once enjoyed. And you're starting to see this shift. A second warning sign is low energy. So if you notice that your teen is now sleeping a lot or just looking lethargic, not really doing much, just low energy, and they used to be a little more bouncy out there, little, have more energy, and you're noticing this shift. The third one is difficulty sleeping or eating, which could be sort of either they're up for long hours, not sleeping, resting, or either they're eating too much, sometimes eating too little, not eating at all. So if you notice a change in sleep patterns, eating patterns, that's another warning sign. Another area is spending more time alone and avoiding social activities. So similar to the first one, if your child was one that just liked to be out and be with friends and interact with others, and then you start to notice, they're not doing that as much anymore. They're not interacting with peers. They don't want to spend time with the family. They're going in their room and they're staying in their room a lot more than they used to. Another one is excessively exercising, dieting. So any of the warning signs of anorexia or bulimia, if you see any of that, that's actually another common warning sign of mental health issues. So if we go on to the next slide. Other things is if you notice or see signs of harm to self. So if you're noticing cuts on your child's arms or just burn marks or just some unusual just markings on their body, or another sign of that could be if they're wearing long sleeves a lot. It's summertime and they're wearing big sweatshirts and you're thinking, that's a little weird. They're doing that. And you start to notice that. Another one is alcohol use, tobacco, or other drugs. That in and of itself may not be a warning sign of mental health issues, but you want to kind of watch that in combination with other things. Then engaging in risky behaviors, or they're just taking risks, going out, sneaking out at night, those sorts of things. Or, you might think that might be opposite of some of the other things we've talked about, but engaging in risky or destructive behaviors is definitely another warning sign of mental health issues. If your child has thoughts of suicide, if they're expressing anything to you, like, I just don't want to be here anymore, or I can't take this anymore, anything like that, you want to take that very seriously. In the schools, I can tell you that when we hear students make comments like that, we have to intervene immediately. We can't leave the child alone. We contact parents, and we really have a plan of action of how to support young people. Sometimes people might think, oh, they're just saying that for attention, but we have to take that really seriously. And I encourage you to do the same thing. If your child is making these kinds of statements of self-harm, you want to definitely take heed to that and have that be something you pay attention to. And this last one might seem a little strange, but sometimes, when young people or anyone suffering with mental health illnesses, they might start to have sort of some unusual ways of thinking. So if they're getting paranoid or hearing things that other people can't hear, so those are signs as well. All right. So one thing that I hear from parents, and this could be a talk in and of itself of how to talk to your teen. So I don't want to make this seem like this is just a passing thing that we're talking about right now, because it is so important that we communicate with our young people. I'll say a couple of things before we get into this. And one is the strength and power of relationships. It is so important to have a relationship with your child, because that's going to far supersede a lot of other things. You will be able to recognize more of the things that I brought up as risk factors and look fors if you have that relationship with your child. The other thing is, don't fall for the thought that they don't need you, because sometimes teenagers, remember when we talked about the teen brain and how they might think about things a little differently than we do because their brain is still growing and developing. And they may say things like, oh, I don't want you, to come to this thing, or I don't care, and they'll give you that thought that they don't want you around or they don't want your influence. I tell parents all the time, don't listen to that. You want to just continue to speak into the life of your child whenever you can. Have other people around that can do the same thing. So let's get into some of the things, some tips for how to talk to your teen. So the first big one that's not on the slide is about that relationship. Have a relationship with your child and stay involved in their lives, even if they make you think that they don't want you to. They really do. I can tell you that as an educator in high school for close to 15 years, I can tell you they do care and want you involved. So listen, that's the big one. So your teen really wants to be heard. And sometimes their actions will speak for them, and sometimes they'll actually speak and let you know things. So when you're hearing and seeing things that are communicating things, you want to really pay attention to that and give them the opportunity to say what they need to say. And sometimes, as adults and as parents, we have a lot we want to say to teenagers, because we have a lot of wisdom to share with them. But listening is really going to go really far with your teen. If they know and can count on you to really listen, they'll start to share more with you and they'll start to tell you things. Okay. I'll tell you a funny thing with my son when he was a teenager. I used to hold him captive in the car when he was driving, and I had to drive with him, which was terrifying in and of itself. But when he was driving, that's when he would talk. And I don't know what it was about him driving, but he would tell me more things when he was driving. I guess he let his guard down when he was driving. But just find those times or opportunities when you can really have that time to listen to your child. The second important thing is, I know we want to, as parents, do this because it is our job to do this, but sometimes we have to kind of resist the urge to tell them what to do. I recommend that you start scaling back a little bit somewhere around middle school. And not that you're not telling them what to do, but try to throw in some opportunities to see if they can figure it out. So with small things that aren't going to have a huge impact, and encourage them and say, hey, I think you can figure that out. I think you can, what do you think you should do? Like ask them questions to get them to be more a part of that. And again, that's a win-win, because not only is it helping them, but it's also creating that relationship we talked about, because they'll see you as someone that kind of trusts them a little bit, like giving them a little room to be able to do some of those things that they're trying to learn and have those opportunities. Next thing that's super important is validating their emotions. So remember how we talked about the teen brain and how there's a lot going on, a lot of growth, a lot of connections, and emotions sometimes are big in the teen brain. But when you say to them something like, wow, that sounds really frustrating, or, oh, I can tell you had a tough day today, or that was a really rough game, letting them know you're validating emotions they have, it really helps calm them down, and it also helps them so that they don't get defensive, because they know that you hear them and that you're recognizing the feelings that they have. That's one of the top things that I hear from the teenagers that I work with, is that they feel that either their parents or other adults don't really believe in the emotions that they feel. They feel like there's no one that really gets, to them, they think it's understanding their emotions. But it's really about validating and letting them know, not necessarily that you understand what they feel, but just that you recognize that they have this feeling. That goes a long way when you're able to do that. Another thing that's a really good thing you can say to your teen, and they may not even be able to have, they may not have an answer to this. So to instead of saying, how can I help you or what can I do, you can say, what do you need, right? That's a little shift, but to a teen, it puts the onus on, it's like, what do you need? I'm recognizing you need something in this moment, and I want to know what it is, and I want to meet that need. How can I help you almost makes it seem like I am doing something. And again, when you think about what teens need, that's sort of taking the shift away from them and putting it on you as the parent that you're doing something. But what do you need is more about validating them and their feelings and then offering something. And they may say, I don't know what I need, or they may snap at you with something. But I tell you, the more you continue with this and persist with some of these things we're talking about, their wall starts to come down and they start to recognize you as a support system. And then your teen also needs to know they're a priority. So sometimes, we might not have the time to do the things we need to do with or for our teen. Or maybe in the past, you weren't able to do that. And now you're saying, I want to make a change and I want to be there. I want to be in my teen's life. I want to build a better relationship. Well, I tell you that it's never too late to do that. Even if you hadn't done it in the past and you want to start new, you can do that. And I think an important thing to do as a parent and as an adult in a teen's life is, if you feel like you haven't done what you needed to do in the past, it's okay to be transparent and apologize and say, you know what? I didn't do the best job of being there for you during whatever period of time. And I want to change that now. And I'm going to do something different. And I want to make you a priority. And maybe you outline some things you want to do. And then, of course, you want to follow through with that. That goes a long way with your teenager when they hear you say things like that and you back it up with actions, because they're looking at us and they're watching us and they want to see how we respond and react. And it's really important that we, make them feel as if they are the priority, which they should be. So let's go to the next one. So then a question comes, people ask, how do I know when I need to get help for my teen? Just like in the earlier slides when we talked about risk factors and we talked about look fors, and I mentioned earlier that when you start to see more and more of these items from that list before popping up, like maybe your teen's not eating, not sleeping, and making statements, disparaging remarks about themselves, or saying they don't want to live, all of those things taken collectively, that's something to kind of pay attention to. You want to say, oh, these are definitely warning signs. These are things I'm seeing that could potentially be dangerous. So again, if you see the warning signs or you see a drastic change in your child, that's definitely a time to know when to get help, and again, the warning signs, if you see them and they're lasting more than a few weeks. So we know some of our teens kind of have the ups and downs, roller coaster kind of thing with their emotions, and it might be a couple of days and then they snap out of it. But if you start to see these warning signs and they're like I would say over a week or two, then that's definitely cause for you to take a pause and do something differently. We'll talk about that as well. If you receive information from teachers, coaches, or anyone that's in your child's life that causes you concern, I know sometimes it's hard to hear things from other people and you think, oh, how did I miss this? How did I not see this? Or I don't see this at home. They're doing this at school or when they're on their sports team, but I don't see it. So is this real? If you get any information from any other adults or peers in your child's life, you want to take that seriously. You want to make sure that you're really acting on and addressing any concerns that you're getting from outside sources. The other thing is if you've talked to your child, because as we said before, you want to talk to them and listen to them and validate them and make them a priority. And let's say you've talked to them and they've asked you for more help. Teenagers are becoming more and more savvy, and they're learning more about mental health, and they know, more about things that are going on. And so if your child says to you, I want to talk to a counselor, or I'd like to, I tried talking to my counselor at school and maybe it didn't work, or I didn't have enough time with my counselor and I need more help, you want to take that seriously. So if your child is saying things like that, you want to definitely do that. And then we have a slide here. Where do you find help? So we have some resources that are going to be shared that you can access. But I highly recommend that whatever you do, you make sure that you talk to your child to find the best fit. I'll tell you, as a school psychologist and a practitioner myself, I have run into many instances where young people have a therapist or counselor and it's not a good match, and they feel like they're stuck in this relationship with them and it's not going well. They're not sharing, they're not getting better, and it's just kind of a recipe for disaster. So I really highly recommend that if you do decide to get professional help for your child, that you make sure you pay attention to what your child is saying about the sessions. It's okay to ask them questions. It's okay to ask, are you enjoying or are you getting something out of your sessions with your psychologist? Is this working for you? Are you able to talk to them? It's great to ask them questions like that, because that therapeutic relationship is so important in any therapy or relationship, because it really helps your child move forward. And then when there are suicidal statements, for our young people, we always share the 988 Lifeline. That's something that's new for the state of Maryland. It's 24/7. They can actually reach out to this crisis hotline. Parents can reach out as well if you're not sure of what to do. There are resources that you can access. If you need to get emergency care for your child, if something, has happened that's pretty significant, there are resources there that you can access to get support for your child. So, we don't want to be shy about accessing those resources, or kind of reluctant to the detriment of our children. You want to go to the next? Okay, so I put my contact information there. There's a QR code. Of course, this is just one set of resources, but I highly recommend, if you want to reach out to me, there's my contact information there as well if you have a question. But I thought it would be good to just answer questions, because I know there were some questions that were sent ahead of this session. So if we have questions from the audience, I would be happy to answer those at this time. And you can put it in the chat. I think that might be the best way to do that. Does anybody have any questions or anything they're wondering about? Okay. Great question. So Mr. Bond asks, what mental health supports are available in the schools now? That's a great question. And across the county, our leadership in the county have made, because of all of these disturbing trends that we've seen, they have made mental health a huge priority. And not just Howard County, many of the counties across the state, because we've seen such a need. One of the first lines of defense is, trusted adults that your children might have. That's definitely, all of our staff are keenly aware of these trends and they're there to help. But then our school counselor. So every student has a school counselor, not just for them, but they have counselors that are available. Usually it's assigned by alphabet. So that's a resource for your child. Each school also has a school psychologist. So the school psychologist is a resource as well. So if you're not sure, for example, if you as a parent have concerns in the school, you can definitely reach out to the school and find out who the counselor is, who the school psychologist is, or check the website and find out who those individuals are. And you can reach out and ask questions. I have parents do that all the time. They'll reach out and ask me questions, or can you check in on my child? Or can you help me with this question I have? In addition to that, many of the schools now have what's called mental health therapists. Not every school has this program, but we do have a lot of school-based social workers that work with our youth and our young people. And some are assigned to work with individual students. Some work with groups of students. So they're, depending on the school and the needs, there are different needs there as well. We have other individuals that work on our student support teams or SSTs that support students and families in a variety of different ways. So if you have a need and you're in the school, I encourage you to reach out to either leadership in the school or to a counselor, and they can definitely link you with other supports that can help you. Let's see. How often do teens seek someone other than their parents to confide in? Very good question. And do you think it's sometimes better for teens to confide in someone that's not their parent? That's a great question. You know, it's interesting. I find that, you know, just in the work that I do, I'm someone in the schools that just likes to connect with young people. So I make it a point to just make myself very accessible, and I just go out and I say, you know, a little thing like saying hello to kids and smiling and complimenting them on something goes a long way in helping to build that trust. And I see that often there are young people that will sort of confide in other trusted adults, not because maybe they don't, or they don't trust their parent, or they don't want to talk to their parent. Remember when I was talking about listening and just being there to validate? Sometimes young people will tell me that they don't feel like they get that from a parent. And so they'll find another adult that they're close to kind of confide in, and they'll do that. So I say, anytime a young person confides in any adult, it's a good thing. You know, it can be a good thing, especially if it's someone in the schools, someone, a trusted adult that's going to help get them on the right path, because we're thinking this is something positive now. So we want our young people to have positive, trusted adults in their lives so that they will be able to. And it's a good one that will then follow up with a parent and say, so for example, with myself, if I meet with a student and I'm hearing, you know, some troubling things about that student, I always reach out to the parent, and I'll let the parent know, hey, I talked to your child today, you know, and I let them know what's going on to kind of help. So someone asked, can you please talk about the impact of social media? Well, I think that is a huge loaded topic, and you are correct. It is a huge impact. You know, if you think about how the reach of social media, right? You know, when many of us were growing up, we just heard stuff in our neighborhood, our community, and that was sort of where we got things. Now, kids can hear stuff from other countries around the world. And we're seeing the impact of just things just catching on by rapid fire, you know, and then their inability to really handle all of the information that's out there, and the comparison factor, you know, because, you know, everybody that's on social media usually posts their best, right? And to our teenagers, they think, oh, that's their average. That's not their average. That's them painting themselves in this light that's probably not realistic. And so then they're measuring themselves against that. In addition, you know, I'm finding that a lot of young people will go to social media and maybe find some maladaptive ways to handle things. I know a lot of the social media platforms have been looking at ways of monitoring content, but it's not always the best way to handle it. So it's really tricky to know and to sort of combat this, because it is really coming from so many other areas. Okay, and can mental health challenges cause serious physical injury? Yes. that can happen. You know, we talked about the self-harm is one way. If you think about when I was talking about individuals that aren't eating, aren't sleeping, aren't taking care of themselves, that can definitely cause some physical injuries if you're not caring for your basic needs. So that definitely the mental and the physical often go hand in hand. And then I have a question here about, oh, that one went fast. Okay. Assessing mental health concerns with students on the spectrum. So that's a question that's kind of near and dear to my heart because I do work with a lot of students with autism. And you're right, it can be a challenge because sometimes our students with autism will latch on to ideas and things maybe in a way that a typical developing teen might not. But again, I say my suggestion is to take every comment seriously, even if you're not sure. You know, it's always better to err on the side of caution. So, you know, we definitely want to take everything they say with seriousness and address it as such. Let's see. Okay, there's a question. It says, in response to, is there an adverse response from the teen who confides in you rather than the parent? You tell the parent and now the teen is confronted by, okay, that's a great comment. You know, it's interesting. I do have times where students will tell me things and I know it's a loaded thing that they're telling me, but I always share with them before I meet with a student. And in fact, all counselors and psychologists start off every discussion with, there are limits to my confidentiality. I can't keep everything in confidence. If you tell me you're going to hurt yourself, someone else, or you're being harmed, you know, we let them know right away. We have to share that information. And if they're upset about it and they're like, oh, I don't want you to tell, I always couch it in, I care for you. We care about you. We want to make sure you're safe and that you're okay. And so that's the way we kind of preface it. So by no means do we keep things confidential or secret that could potentially be harmful. And we also don't make it as if the parent is the villain. We make it that we're working together. We're a team. We want to support you. We care about you. So that's kind of the way. And generally speaking, it's worked. I haven't had a case where, you know, someone has gotten upset and said, oh, you know, you told on me, kind of a thing. They kind of get it. And then we have, can school counselors identify the teen kids having the factors you mentioned in the meeting as kids that spend more time in a day at school? I'm not sure what this question is asking. Teen kids. Do we have the ability to have that person unmute, or is it too large? I'm not sure of what the person is asking.
Can you hear me now? This is free.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. My question is like all the factors you mentioned in the meeting today. So in any school counselors can identify with the kids like who have these issues or something, and they'll come back to the parents and let us know like okay, I see like so and so factors just you mentioned in the meeting in the kid. Can you talk to him or like that the counselor will let parent know about if he or she finds anything about the kid.
Okay, I see what you're saying now. And that does actually happen. And most of the time we'll get it from teachers. Like a teacher will reach out. If they're not sure, may reach out to a counselor or psychologist and say, hey, I'm kind of noticing these things. What do you think? And then I often tell them, well, let's have a conversation with the parent. We want to let the parent know what's going on. So yes, when we're noticing things in the schools, we definitely circle back to parents to let them know what's going on.
So on this note, like if the kid is he's 100% good at school, but coming back to home, he is very secretive. He wants to spend whole time in his room. All that. How can we take that?
So I think going back to just trying to talk with him if your efforts to talk to them about it aren't working, then, finding someone else that can connect. If there's a mentor, a family member, an older brother, a relative that can maybe make that connection if you're still struggling with that. Because sometimes there is sort of this balance because, especially with males and their mothers, there's this period of time where there's this turmoil, but it gets better. I can tell you, my son's 25 now and he calls and checks on me. So, so there is a period of time where our males are trying to kind of assert themselves as males and they kind of clash with mom. So if you could get another male to kind of get involved and kind of speak to him and just like, what's going on, just to make sure things are okay. If that's what you have to do to get more information, if he's not, responding to you directly, that would be the suggestion I would have.
Okay,
So
thank you.
no problem. So there's a question about advice for parents whose child may reject help or therapy. And what other alternatives would you recommend? That is a really, really good question because I've actually had some parents they knew their child was struggling. They brought them to me and the child would not talk and was just like, no, I'm not doing this. And, we try to work with them, but if a child is unwilling to do that, then, my suggestion would be to not give up, keep trying, and maybe it's the match of the provider. Remember, we talked about how important that is to get the right match. It could be, again, getting another adult to come and speak to in their life to kind of get them to break down that barrier. Because it is virtually impossible if the child does not want to talk or connect with a therapist. We can't force them to do it. So I would just say, really trying to work on figuring out how to, break down the walls for that. Okay, that's a great question.
Dr.
And
Sheppard, there
yeah.
was a question or comment with a hand raised. I'm going to unmute that person right
Oh,
now.
okay, sure. Did you have a question or comment?
Yes, hello. First, thank you for your presentation. It was very helpful. My name is Melissa Rice. I work for the Department of Veteran Affairs. I'm a registered nurse. I also am a Narcan advocate and an advocate, a fentanyl awareness advocate. So I just wanted to make people aware of the DEA's campaign, the One Pill campaign. You can go to the DEA and just put one pill in and it will come in. Up about the One Pill campaign, and I just want to tell people that Narcan is an opioid reversal drug, and what fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that's used now in illicit drugs. So when you're talking about social media and things of that nature, what they've seen now is a lot of teenagers, young people, go to places like Snapchat. There's a pending lawsuit against Snapchat right now, and they're not trying to get fentanyl. They're usually trying to get like Xanax or Percocet or something of that nature, and it's laced with fentanyl. So I just want people to know about that, and also be aware that you can have Narcan. Anyone can have Narcan on them, and to help people and know that that is a reversal drug used in overdose type situations. So I just want to thank everybody and send positive energy. Thank you.
You want to wait for it to go?
So, just comment, I can just take you.
Dr. Sheppard, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I
I
think that
hate to interrupt Dr. Sheppard, but while I have this moment, I'd like to ask the participants, one, I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening, but we have a survey that's in the comments section. If you could please complete that. We're interested in your input as to the helpfulness of this presentation, what you'd like to see in the future, and get your overall impressions of tonight's presentation. So in advance, I thank you for completing the survey. Pardon the interruption. I'll go back to the program. And also there's a resource page. In addition to what Dr. Sheppard has shared, there's a page regarding additional resources for your youth. And so please go to the comment section, download that information, and hopefully you'll find it helpful as well.
Yeah. I think I only see one more question, and it just asks about device use. And, it says, I've heard to limit it to 1 hour. Well, good luck with that with your teenager. I'll just say that. That's probably not realistic. They're not going to just do an hour. But what I recommend, instead of saying, put your phone away, that kind of thing, what I've seen helpful is redirecting. Say, hey, why don't you come with me to the store? I'm going to the store. Why don't you come with me? And you don't need your phone. You're fine. Or just in a sort of matter-of-fact way, engage them instead of saying, put the phone away. That often is more effective than, saying you can only be on your phone for X number of hours or whatever. Or maybe have family rules around the phone. Like when we're eating dinner together, the phone is not, it's off and away. But just remember, you want to kind of abide by that as well. So if you're setting up something for them in that regard, you want to show them, hey, I'm committed to this too. So just having more time that doesn't involve the phone, I think is the way to go with that. Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much again. I have enjoyed doing this. I wish I could see all your smiling faces, but this is an area that's near and dear to my heart that has just been a focus of a lot of my time and energy. So I love speaking on this topic. And if I can be of further assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheppard. I believe we're going to be closed out by Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Bacheloress Williams. I'm Bruce Nelson. I'm the president of Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated, Kappa Phi Lambda chapter. A lot of great information has been shared. I want to thank all of the participants. I think we've had probably about 70 participants that joined in on a Thursday evening. I mean, that's an overwhelming number of parents who probably are helping with dinner and homework and trying to get their kids ready for the next day's school. So thank you for being here. We promise not to keep you too long, but here is something that I do want to share. Our communities are better when we're able to share information, right? When we're able to talk about topics that we know affect our communities. And we know the last several years, and COVID was a part of that, but our children have been struggling with mental health, with depression and anxiety, and whether it turns into drunk driving or things of that nature. We've seen the results of trauma and students struggling. And the only way that our community is going to be better is if we can continue to communicate. That's why the survey is important. So we can get feedback about how you felt about this session and things we can do in the future to continue the dialogue. We can continue to try to be as preventative as possible so that families can stay whole and so that we continue to build and prosper together as a community. Alpha Kappa, Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated, part of our mission is to be able to advocate for our communities. And, one lost child, it does a lot to our school communities, to our families. We're trying to prevent those things from happening as much as possible. And I think the information shared tonight, especially if, you've had family members that have gone through mental health challenges, hopefully that information has helped us to be a little more informative and hopefully prevent, the next fatality, from happening. So I want to thank the planning committee for putting this together. It's been a wonderful event. And most importantly, the community for being here and participating in this wonderful activity. We want to bid you a good night, and hopefully we can convene soon and have another conversation about this very important topic. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Committee, please stay on. Rosalind, Dr. Sheppard, stay on.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.